He threw $200,000 on the table, thinking money could buy respect. But when a humble black waitress answered him in flawless Chinese, the whole restaurant froze. What happened next taught him the cost of arrogance and the true language of respect. The restaurant glowed like gold that night, every corner shimmering with quiet elegance. The air carried the scent of roses and rich cologne, and a slow jazz tune danced through the dim lights. It was the kind of place where fortunes were discussed over fine wine and where every whisper sounded expensive. In a corner booth sat Mr. Dalton, a man whose confidence was as large as his wallet. His diamond watch caught the light every time he lifted his hand, flashing like a warning sign of his arrogance. Across from him sat 3 foreign businessmen, guests he wanted to impress. Laughter filled the table, loud and careless, echoing across the marble floor. At the other end of the room, Tasha adjusted her apron and straightened her notepad. She had been working here for over a year, always calm, always polite, always invisible. Her movements were graceful, her smile professional, the kind that comforted customers but never invited familiarity. To many, she was just another waitress. No one saw the quiet intelligence behind her eyes, or the years of education she carried like a secret. Tonight, she simply wanted to do her job, earn her tips, and go home to her mother, who was recovering from surgery. When she approached Mr. Dalton's table, the tone shifted. He looked up at her name tag and smirked. "Tasha, huh?" he said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "Tell me, sweetheart, do you even know where the food you serve comes from?" His voice was heavy with mockery, the kind of tone used by people who mistake cruelty for humor. His friends chuckled, nodding as if it were entertainment. Tasha's smile didn't waver. "I'm here to make your night comfortable, sir," she replied softly. Her words were simple, but her calmness unsettled him. People like Mr. Dalton fed on reactions, and she gave him none. He leaned back, swirling the wine in his glass. "Comfortable, huh? All right, let's see how comfortable you are with this." He looked around the table, his smirk growing wider. "If you can take my order in Chinese, I'll give you $200,000. Right here, right now. Come on, surprise me." His companions burst into laughter, slapping the table, enjoying the spectacle. The restaurant grew quieter as nearby diners turned to look. The sound of laughter didn't fade quickly. It rippled, cruel and sharp. Tasha blinked once, her expression unreadable. Her fingers held the notepad still, her posture straight and unshaken. Inside, she felt the familiar sting of being underestimated, a feeling she had known since college interviews, since early jobs where people spoke over her. But she had learned long ago that dignity was her greatest defense. She took a breath, her voice steady as she looked directly into Mr. Dalton's eyes. The smirk on his face deepened. He was sure she would fumble, maybe even blush or walk away. But then she opened her mouth. Her first words weren't English. They rolled off her tongue in smooth, flawless Mandarin. 欢迎光临，尊敬的先生，您想喝点什么? The sound cut through the laughter like a blade. Every head turned. The foreign businessman froze, blinking in disbelief. Her pronunciation was perfect. Tone, rhythm, everything. She didn't stop there. Without hesitation, she switched languages again, speaking in crisp Japanese, then in gentle French, and then Spanish, each one flowing effortlessly, each accent precise. The more she spoke, the quieter the restaurant became. Mr. Dalton's grin vanished. He stared at her, eyes wide, glass halfway to his lips. His guests exchanged glances, one of them whispering something in Mandarin and Tasha responding fluently without missing a beat. That man laughed, not mockingly but in admiration. "She speaks better Mandarin than you, Dalton," he said, shaking his head. The room erupted, not in laughter this time, but in stunned applause. Even the pianist paused, smiling as he watched the waitress stand taller than the millionaire who once mocked her. Tasha finished taking their order in English, her tone polite and steady. "Thank you for your patience, sir," she said as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She bowed slightly and turned to leave. Behind her, the only sound was the quiet clink of Mr. Dalton's untouched glass setting down on the table. For a long moment, he said nothing. The color in his face shifted from red to pale. His guests whispered among themselves, some smiling, some shaking their heads. The arrogance that had filled the room a few minutes ago had evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that hung heavy in the air. Tasha walked away calmly, her head high, her steps steady. She didn't need applause, didn't need to turn around. The power of that moment was already hers. She had turned humiliation into history, without raising her voice, without anger, just pure composure. The restaurant slowly returned to motion, but something had changed. Conversations were softer now, laughter gentler. Mr. Dalton stared at the table in front of him, his reflection faintly visible in the polished glass. The weight of his own words pressed on him like shame he couldn't hide from. His diamond watch still glittered under the light, but for the first time, it felt like nothing more than a piece of metal. Across the room, Tasha smiled faintly as she placed the order slip by the kitchen window. Another table called her name, and she went to them with the same calm grace. She didn't know that the story of this night would soon spread beyond the restaurant, that people would talk about the waitress who spoke 9 languages and silenced arrogance with elegance. For her, it was just another night at work. But for everyone who witnessed it, it was a lesson they would never forget. The air inside the restaurant turned still, almost electric, as if every chandelier light had dimmed just to witness what was about to happen. Tasha stood beside Mr. Dalton's table, her notepad in hand, her calm eyes fixed on his smug face. The sound of his laughter still lingered, sharp and shallow, but it faded quickly when she opened her mouth. What came out wasn't English. It was Mandarin, pure, fluent, and melodic. 欢迎光临，尊敬的先生，您想喝点什么? The words rolled off her tongue like silk, every tone precise, every syllable perfect. The laughter around the table froze mid-air. One of Dalton's business partners, a Chinese investor, blinked hard, then leaned forward in disbelief. His jaw parted slightly as he whispered to the others in Mandarin. "Did you hear that?" "She's perfect," Dalton's smirk faltered. The arrogance that usually lived in his face began to crack. He tried to process what he had just heard, but before he could say a word, Tasha continued, this time in Japanese. Her tone changed, softer, more rhythmic, perfectly matching the language's grace. She switched again, now into French, her voice smooth and elegant, pronouncing each word with the poise of a Parisian native. Then Spanish, warm and confident. And finally, Arabic, her voice strong yet delicate, filling the room with an unexpected beauty that made every person listen as though she were delivering a prayer. The transformation was immediate. Moments ago, the restaurant was filled with mockery and laughter. Now it was reverent silence. Every eye was fixed on her. Every conversation had stopped. The pianist at the corner paused mid-tune, his hands hovering above the keys, his expression awestruck. The waiters had frozen in place, holding trays mid-air. The only sound was her voice, measured, flawless, dignified. When she stopped, the silence didn't end immediately. It lingered like an echo, thick and heavy. Then, softly, one of the foreign businessmen chuckled, not mockingly, but with genuine admiration. "She speaks better Mandarin than you, Dalton," he said with a smirk. The others laughed, not the cruel laughter from before, but one filled with disbelief and respect. The tension shattered like glass. Dalton's face turned red, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He tried to recover his composure, but his tongue stumbled over his words. His pride, once towering, now looked small and fragile under the weight of her intelligence. Tasha stood still, poised and quiet. There was no triumph in her eyes, only calm professionalism. She glanced down at her notepad, wrote something quickly, and in perfect English said, "Would you like to start with the house wine, or shall I bring the special bottle you requested, sir?" Her tone was gentle, but beneath it was an elegance that needed no defense. Dalton could only nod. The arrogance in his voice was gone, replaced by a faint, awkward murmur. Around them, people began whispering. Some clapped quietly, others simply watched with admiration. A woman from a nearby table pulled out her phone, trying to capture the moment discreetly. The whispers carried across the room like ripples in still water. "Did you hear her? She spoke 5 languages," one voice said. "That waitress, she's incredible," said another. Mr. Dalton's business partners couldn't contain their smiles. They leaned toward him, teasing lightly. "I think you just lost your bet," one of them said. Another added, "You might want to hire her instead of mocking her." Their laughter was good-natured, but to Dalton, every chuckle felt like another cut to his pride. He stared down at his plate, his earlier bravado gone. The sparkle in his diamond cufflink suddenly looked hollow. Tasha finished taking the order, repeating everything back with precision. 2 ribeye steaks, 1 medium rare, 1 well done, a glass of Chardonnay, and 3 glasses of Bordeaux. Her words were smooth, professional, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Then she bowed slightly, her expression serene. "Thank you for your patience, sir." It was a small gesture, but it struck deeper than any insult ever could. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as she turned and walked away. Her posture was straight, her steps light, her face composed. She didn't glance back, didn't seek approval, didn't wait for applause. She didn't need to. Every person watching knew what they had just witnessed. A moment of quiet power, the kind that leaves an imprint on everyone who sees it. As she disappeared behind the curtain toward the kitchen, the whispers grew louder. A soft wave of clapping started at one table, then another. Even the manager, who had been frozen near the counter, allowed a proud smile to form on his face. The pianist, breaking the silence, began to play again, but this time his tune was lighter, brighter, almost celebratory. At the corner table, Mr. Dalton sat motionless. His business partners had resumed their conversation, now in subdued tones. One of them patted his shoulder sympathetically. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes money can buy the meal, but never the respect that serves it." Dalton didn't respond. His glass of wine trembled slightly in his hand as he stared at the tablecloth. The echoes of her voice, those elegant, fluent phrases, looped endlessly in his mind. The restaurant slowly returned to life. Waiters moved again, plates clinked, conversations rose in polite hums. But something had changed. The laughter that once filled the air now carried a touch of humility. Guests glanced occasionally toward the kitchen as if expecting to see her again. Some smiled, others shook their heads in quiet awe. In the reflection of the wine glass, Dalton caught his own face, a man stripped of pride, watching a truth unfold that he'd spent years ignoring. For the first time in a long time, he felt small. And though no one said it aloud, everyone in that room knew the same thing. That night, the richest person in the restaurant wasn't the man with the gold watch. It was the woman who had just walked away, speaking the language of respect fluently enough to silence the world. Dalton sat motionless, staring at the faint reflection of his face in the wine glass. The laughter that had once been his ally now mocked him. It bounced around the room, echoing in his mind until it became unbearable. His foreign business partners tried to ease the tension, offering polite conversation, but he couldn't hear them. Every word that Tasha had spoken replayed in his head. The fluency, the poise, the effortless confidence that stripped away every illusion of superiority he'd ever worn. For the first time in a long time, Mr. Dalton felt small. The gold on his wrist no longer glimmered with power. It looked like a shackle made of his own arrogance. He excused himself quietly, the words catching in his throat. As he rose from his seat, the chair scraped softly against the floor, drawing a few glances from nearby tables. He loosened his tie, his chest tight, and made his way toward the manager's desk near the entrance. The manager, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, straightened immediately when he saw Dalton approach. Dalton's expression was unreadable, half anger, half confusion, but mostly guilt. "Who is she?" he asked, his voice low but trembling with something that sounded almost like desperation. "That waitress, Tasha, who is she really?" The manager paused, a small knowing smile curving his lips. "That's Tasha Williams," he said softly. "She graduated top of her class in linguistics. Speaks 9 languages fluently. She used to work at the embassy in Washington, translating for diplomats. She came back home when her mother fell ill. Been taking care of her ever since." His eyes softened further as he added, "We're lucky to have her here." Dalton blinked, his throat tightening. 9 languages. An embassy. A sick mother. All this time, he'd mocked her like she was a child who didn't belong in his world. But she wasn't beneath him. She was far above him, not in wealth, but in grace, strength, and intelligence. The realization hit hard, like a mirror breaking inside his chest. He turned his gaze toward the kitchen door where she had disappeared moments earlier. The world around him suddenly felt quieter. The laughter dimmed, the conversations distant. For the first time, he truly saw her. Not as a waitress, but as a human being with a story, one he had never cared enough to imagine. He returned to his table slowly, each step heavier than the last. His friends were whispering now, perhaps sensing his discomfort, perhaps pretending not to notice. The untouched food sat in front of him, the wine glass half empty. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his checkbook. His hands trembled slightly as he uncapped his pen. The same hands that had signed million-dollar deals and contracts now struggled to hold steady. He stared at the blank line for a long time before finally writing $200,000. The number stared back at him like a confession. When Tasha returned, balancing a tray of dishes, she looked just as calm as before, collected, professional, unbothered. Her face showed no trace of pride or resentment, just quiet composure. Dalton stood as she approached, his movement drawing the attention of nearby tables. For a moment he couldn't find the right words. All his life he had been surrounded by people who treated him like he was untouchable, but in front of her he felt exposed. "Miss Tasha," he began, his voice low and uneven. She looked up, surprised by the sudden respect in his tone. "I owe you an apology. I was wrong, terribly wrong. You didn't just earn this." He placed the check on the table, sliding it gently toward her. "You reminded me what real respect sounds like." The restaurant seemed to pause again. Even the distant clinking of glasses faded. Tasha glanced down at the check, her brow softening as she read the amount. Her lips parted slightly, but she didn't touch it. Instead, she looked back at him with steady eyes and said quietly, "I don't need your money, sir. Just treat people better." Her voice wasn't harsh. It wasn't even angry. It carried the weight of truth, the kind that doesn't need to be shouted to be heard. Dalton's throat tightened. He wanted to insist, to push the check closer, but her calm dignity held him still. She didn't want his pity, and she didn't need his approval. All she wanted was decency, the kind that should have been free all along. Around them, people watched silently. The business partners who once laughed now sat humbled, their gazes lowered. The same quiet that had fallen when she first spoke, Mandarin returned, but this time it was deeper, filled with reverence. Dalton slowly withdrew his hand. He looked at her, seeing not just the woman standing before him, but every person he had ever overlooked, mocked, or dismissed. Shame pressed down on him like a heavy coat he couldn't remove. He finally nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're right," he said. "I'll do better." Tasha gave a small, understanding nod and turned back toward the kitchen. She didn't look back. The check remained on the table, untouched, a silent reminder of the moment that had just unfolded. The laughter that had once defined the restaurant was gone, replaced by a stillness filled with thought. People returned to their meals slowly, but the air had changed. It was no longer a place of arrogance and noise. It was a room that had just witnessed humility, raw and unguarded. Dalton sank back into his chair, his reflection trembling in the wine glass again. For once, he didn't see the powerful man everyone admired. He saw a man learning, finally, what it meant to be human. Dalton stepped out of the restaurant into the cool night air, his reflection flickering across the glass doors as they closed behind him. For years, he had walked with his chin high, the weight of his fortune pressing down like armor, but tonight that armor cracked. The sound of laughter, the echo of Tasha's calm voice, and the truth in her final words played over and over in his head like a haunting melody. The city's glow painted gold lines across the sidewalk, but even under the streetlights, he felt small, smaller than he'd ever felt before. For once, the man who believed money could buy respect realized that some things could never be purchased, not with all the gold in the world. He loosened his tie, exhaling deeply, and for the first time in a long time, he walked without his usual swagger. Each step away from that restaurant felt like shedding a layer of arrogance he hadn't even known he was wearing. Inside, Tasha continued her work quietly, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She helped another waiter refill glasses, offered a warm smile to a family celebrating a birthday, and checked on a couple seated near the window. Her calmness wasn't an act. It was who she was. She didn't crave attention or praise. To her, doing her job with dignity was its own form of power. The other staff members looked at her differently now. There was admiration in their eyes, but also pride. They had witnessed something remarkable. Not a confrontation, but a lesson in grace. When the last guest left and the lights dimmed, the restaurant fell into a peaceful hush. As Tasha clocked out, the manager gave her a gentle nod. No words were needed. Respect had already been spoken. Outside, the night felt alive. Cars moved like streams of light, and the air carried the faint hum of the city's heartbeat. Tasha walked down the sidewalk, her coat wrapped tight against the breeze. The glow from the restaurant behind her reflected in the windows she passed, turning her shadow into a quiet symbol of strength. She wasn't rich, at least not in the way people measured wealth. But in that moment, she carried something far more valuable, a peace that came from knowing who she was and what she stood for. In a world obsessed with showing off, the narrator's voice whispered through the scene, she proved that grace is louder than gold, that respect is a language spoken by the heart. As she reached the corner, a couple who had been dining earlier called out softly, "Miss, thank you for tonight." They didn't know her name, but they knew her impact. She smiled politely, nodding in acknowledgement before continuing her walk. Behind her, a few of the restaurant staff stepped outside for a smoke break. When they saw her leaving, they put out their cigarettes, clapping quietly. It wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It was a gesture of respect, one that said more than words ever could. Tasha's eyes glistened for a moment, but she didn't stop. She just smiled, whispered a quiet goodnight, and kept walking. The soft jazz from inside the restaurant drifted faintly through the door, blending with the city sounds. Somewhere above, a billboard for luxury watches gleamed in neon. Dalton had one just like it. But what good was gold on your wrist if your heart remained heavy? At that same moment, Dalton stood across the street in silence, his hands buried in his coat pockets. He had stayed behind longer than he intended, unable to shake the image of Tasha's composure. He watched her from a distance, not with pride or curiosity, but with humility. For the first time, he wasn't looking down on someone. He was looking up. As she disappeared into the crowd, he whispered under his breath, "Thank you." The words faded into the night. Unheard, but they were real. The scene softened, the noise of the city fading beneath a gentle piano tune. The narrator's voice returned one last time, calm and steady, like a heartbeat in the dark. She didn't need money to prove her worth. Her wisdom already made her rich, because true value doesn't shine. It glows quietly in moments when no one's watching. And sometimes, the richest souls are the ones wearing aprons instead of diamonds. The city lights shimmered against the pavement as the camera panned upward, showing the stars hidden behind the haze of downtown. Life moved on. The cars, the people, the endless hum of ambition. But somewhere between that restaurant and the quiet streets beyond it, a lesson lingered in the air. "Respect everyone," the narrator whispered, "because you never know who's standing behind that apron. Sometimes, the most ordinary people speak the language of greatness." As the screen dimmed, the final image was of Tasha's silhouette crossing the street, her posture straight, her steps unhurried. She didn't glance back because she didn't need to. She had already left her mark, not through anger, not through pride, but through calm, quiet dignity. And that, more than anything, was her victory. The music softened into silence, and the moral faded in slow, deliberate words. Don't judge someone by their job, race, or clothes. True intelligence doesn't brag. It reveals itself in moments of grace. Humility is priceless, and arrogance always pays the price. Then, just before the fade to black, a final line lingered like a whisper of truth. Greatness doesn't need translation. It speaks in kindness.